The first time I saw the lights moving under the trees, I was halfway down the service road with a fuel can in one hand and my radio hissing against my chest. It was a little after 1 in the morning. I know that because I had checked the time 3 times on the way down from the weather station, mostly to keep myself awake. In the Smokies, darkness doesn't settle so much as it stacks. Ridge behind ridge, branch over branch, black shapes layered so tightly you stop trusting distance. A light in those woods can be 10 feet away or half a mile. Sound works the same way. So when I saw 3 pale points drifting between the trunks below the road, my first thought was hikers. My second was that nobody should have been out there. The station where I worked sat above a closed stretch of trail on the Tennessee side, in one of those areas tourists never really think about. Everyone pictures overlooks and packed parking lots and neat little signs with bare warnings. They don't picture the service roads, the buried lines, the old sheds, the weather monitors screwed into bedrock, the maintenance cabins left over from projects nobody remembers starting. I did nighttime checks on a cluster of equipment scattered along the ridge. Batteries, sensors, emergency generator, rain gauge, one radio repeater that always chose the worst weather to act up. It was dull work most nights. Solitary, repetitive, good money for a man who didn't want to be around many people. The only thing my supervisor had said to me that first week that sounded even remotely strange was this: if you ever see lights moving below the road after midnight, stay on the gravel. That was it. No speech, no smile, no ghost story tone, just a sentence delivered while he was signing a form on the hood of his truck. I had laughed because I thought he meant poachers. He didn't laugh back. I mean it, he said. Doesn't matter who you think it is. Stay on the gravel. At 1 in the morning, with 3 dim lights gliding through the trees like people walking with covered flashlights, that sentence came back so clearly, it felt like he'd spoken it into my ear. I set the fuel can down and leaned out over the edge of the road. Hey, I called. Trail's closed down there. The lights stopped. Nothing else did. The woods still moved the way they move at night. Leaves stirring somewhere high up, insects in the brush, that low, constant breathing of wind climbing a slope. But the lights stopped so abruptly, it was like seeing 3 nails driven into darkness. Then, one by one, they tilted upward toward me. Not flashlights, headlamps, too low apart to be normal. Not a line of hikers, more like 3 people standing close enough to touch. My radio cracked. It didn't ring. It cracked, loud enough to make me flinch. Then Earl's voice came through so fast and flat it took me a second to process what he was saying. Don't answer anything they ask you. I snatched the radio up. Earl, get back to the truck. Something moved beneath the lights, a shape separating from the dark behind them. Then a voice floated up from the slope. Can you tell us if this road goes to Klingman's? It sounded wrong in a way I couldn't place at first. Perfectly human, young, maybe a woman, out of breath, polite, but too clear. We were separated by at least 40 yards of steep woods. Her voice should have snagged on branches, flattened in the leaves, come up broken. Instead, it reached me clean, like she was standing beside my shoulder. I looked down harder, trying to make out faces. And that was my mistake. My eyes adjusted just enough to show me there weren't 3 lights. There were 4. One of them had been unlit until I moved. That 4th shape stood a little uphill from the others, closer to the road than they were, not wearing a headlamp, just standing in the dark, facing me. Back to the truck, Earl said again, louder now. The woman below called up. We've been trying to find the road for hours. And from somewhere closer, too close, From just below the lip of the ditch at my feet, a second voice said quietly, "Please." I jerked back so hard I nearly fell over the fuel can. There was nobody on the road with me. Nothing in the ditch I could see. Just wet grass and the drop into the trees. I grabbed the can and started backing uphill without taking my eyes off the edge. My boots crunched on gravel. That sound mattered more than it should have. The instant I was fully on the road again, breathing hard, the three lights below shifted. Not upward, sideways. They began moving parallel to me through the woods, matching my retreat without ever climbing. The fourth, dark shape didn't move at all. I made it to the truck, threw the can in the bed, and got inside with the doors locked before I realized my hands were shaking badly enough to miss the keys twice. "Drive," Earl said through the radio. "What the hell is that?" "Drive first." I started the truck and reversed so fast the rear tires skidded. The lights below the road kept pace for maybe 30 yards. Then the road bent. Trees crowded in, and they were gone. I didn't stop until I reached the main gate near the lower access point, where Earl was waiting in his own truck with the engine running and the high beams pointed uphill. He got out before I had fully parked. He was in his 60s, heavy through the shoulders, face cut by weather and old acne scars, the kind of man who never looked surprised by anything because surprise itself seemed like a waste of energy. That night he looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "You talked to them." "They talked to me." "That's not what I asked." I thought about the voice at my feet, that soft, impossible please. I yelled down at them before I knew. He shut his eyes for a second like he was counting. Then he looked past me into the dark woods and said, "All right." That all right carried no reassurance in it. It sounded like a mechanic hearing a bad engine noise and deciding not to tell the owner yet. "What are they?" I asked. He ignored that. "Did you leave the gravel?" "No." "Did you go into the trees for a better look?" "No." "Did one of them get ahead of the others?" I hesitated. His face tightened. "Did one of them get ahead of the others?" "I saw somebody closer to the road than the others. I don't know if it was the same group." He nodded once, not surprised. Then he said the sentence that kept me awake until dawn. "They can't cross open gravel unless you invite them by making room." I stared at him. "You want to maybe start over from the beginning?" But Earl had already turned toward the gate. "You'll stay in the cabin tonight," he said. "Don't drive back up till daylight." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him, if there were people lost in the woods, we should be calling somebody. Search and rescue. Rangers. Anybody. But there was something in the way he kept scanning the tree line around the lower lot, as if he expected someone to step out at any second and join the conversation. I followed him to the little maintenance cabin by the gate, and he laid out the rest of it while making coffee he didn't drink. He did not explain what the lights were. He did not tell me a story about old mountain folklore or disappearances or anything dramatic enough to match the look on his face. He only told me what mattered. If I worked nights on that ridge, there were rules. Stay on gravel after midnight. If you hear someone walking beside you in the trees, do not match their pace. If a voice asks you a question from below the road, do not answer until you can see both of its hands. "If I can see both hands," I said, "what then?" "Then it's probably a person." "Probably." He said it the way you'd say it about a rattlesnake in tall grass. I laughed then, not because I found it funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do. "And if I can't see both hands, drive away." He slid a spare key to the cabin across the table. "You don't need to understand it. You just need to follow it." I should have quit the next morning. That's what anyone sane would say, and maybe they'd be right. But daylight in the Smokies can make you feel stupid for what scared you at night. The road I had backed away from looked ordinary at sunrise. Ruts in the gravel, dew in the ditches, rhododendron thickets. A steep drop through hardwoods toward a trail switchback so obvious I couldn't believe I'd thought anything had been right beneath me. I walked the edge in broad morning sun and found no footprints except my own on the road and a set of deer tracks cutting the mud below. No lost hikers, no sign of Earl's concern written into the land. Just mountain. And then there was the practical part. I'd only been on the job a month. My apartment lease in Maryville had just renewed. I didn't have another offer lined up. Earl was strange, yes, but not unstable. Men who work in remote places get superstitions. Rules build themselves around repetitive danger. Mine shafts, fire lookouts, offshore rigs. Every isolated job I'd ever had came with stories that acted like safety equipment. Don't whistle on the platform. Don't say a dead man's name after dark. Don't drive the south cut in heavy fog. Half nonsense, half hard-earned pattern recognition. So I decided what most people decide when they want to keep their life from changing. I told myself there was probably an explanation. For the next 2 weeks, I worked only day shifts. Earl said the schedule had changed. I knew it hadn't. It felt less like accommodation than observation. He rode with me twice and watched what I did when the road narrowed near the tree line, when a sound came from below, when I stepped out at the repeater shack. He never mentioned the lights again, neither did I. Then a storm front rolled through and knocked out the upper station. Earl had a fever, the kind older men dismiss until they're sweating through a chair. By 6 that evening he called me and asked if I could do the reset alone. "Before dark?" I asked. A pause. "If you can." I looked at the radar on my phone. Another band was coming through, slower and heavier. And, "If I can't?" Another pause. Then, "Remember the rules." That was how I found myself back on the ridge at 11:40 p.m., rain fading to mist, tires slipping on wet gravel, wipers smearing the reflected glow of my own headlights across hanging branches. There is a point on that road where the trees change. It isn't visible on a map. It isn't marked. But once you've driven it enough, you feel it. Above that point, the woods are just woods. Dense, wet, old, but familiar. Below it, especially at night, the forest starts seeming arranged. Not manicured, worse than that. Intentionally occupied. I passed that point and felt my shoulders lock. The upper station was fine. A breaker had tripped in the shed. I reset it, checked the battery levels, logged the readings, and kept the truck idling with the headlights on the whole time because I suddenly understood why Earl always had. On the way back down, mist threaded through the beams in long white veils. Every branch seemed to lean inward. I kept the radio turned up and my eyes on the center of the road. At the curve above the old trail crossover, something hit the passenger door. Not hard, just once. A flat, open-handed slap. I yanked the wheel and stopped myself from braking. Gravel sprayed from the rear tires as I corrected. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. Nothing in the headlights. Nothing in the mirrors. Then footsteps began in the woods to my right, perfectly paced with the truck. Not running, walking. Step, step, step. I was moving maybe 15 miles an hour on the wet incline. The footsteps stayed level with the passenger side door, as if whoever made them had no trouble with the slope, the roots, the brush, the darkness. I gripped the wheel tighter. Do not match their pace. That had sounded ridiculous in daylight. Now it sounded precise. I accelerated. The footsteps accelerated. I slowed, not meaning to, just reacting. They slowed too. It took me a second to understand the rule. The danger wasn't that something in the woods could keep up. The danger was the urge to treat it like company, to settle into rhythm with it, to accept its presence as parallel, manageable, almost social. I hit the gas hard. The truck lurched forward. The footsteps didn't speed up this time. They just stopped, instantly, in the brush beside me. And for 3 full seconds, from just beyond the passenger window, something ran its fingers down the side of the truck. Not nails, not claws, knuckles maybe. A dragging, exploratory tap over wet metal. I didn't look. I don't know why. I didn't. Maybe some part of me already knew that looking would feel too much like responding. The road bent left. The sound fell away. At the next wide patch of gravel, I pulled over with the engine running and tried to breathe slowly enough to think. "Earl," I said into the radio. "You there?" Static. Then, faintly, another voice. Not his. A woman's. Same polite tone as the first night. "Can you tell us if this road goes to Klingman's?" I dropped the radio like it had shocked me. The speaker kept hissing on the seat between us. No repeat of the question. Just static. I drove the rest of the way down, with one hand on the wheel, and the other clenched hard enough to leave crescent marks in my palm. The next morning Earl was at the cabin, pale and furious. Not at me, but near enough it spilled onto me anyway. "You radioed them back. I called for you. On Channel 3? Yes." He swore under his breath. I hadn't even known there were multiple channels worth caring about. To me, the radio had been a radio. To him, it was suddenly a set of unlocked doors I'd walked through barefoot. He got up, went to a metal locker by the wall, and took out a laminated card stained brown around the edges. He set it in front of me. 3 typed lines. "Keep to gravel after 12 a.m. Do not answer a voice you cannot fully see. If the radio repeats your own last question back to you, leave before it finishes." "That last one would have been useful yesterday," I said. Earl ignored me. "There used to be just the first rule." "Used to be?" The others came later. And that was the first thing he'd said that truly scared me in daylight. Rules didn't come later unless something was learning, or changing, or getting closer. I looked up. "What exactly are we talking about?" He stood by the sink, staring through the small window toward the road as if choosing how much to say. Finally he said, "You know what most lost people do in these mountains at night? Panic? They look for roads, gravel if they can find it, open ground, something man-made, something that holds shape in the dark." He turned back to me. "There are things up there that look for roads too." "Animals? If they were animals, I'd say animals." That should have been my breaking point. Instead, it hooked me. Fear gets mistaken for curiosity all the time, especially in men who don't want to think of themselves as afraid. I told myself I needed the truth to know whether this was insanity or danger. I told myself rules without explanation were just a good way to make people careless. What I really mean is this. Once a thing has reached into the safe shape of your life and left fingerprints there, it becomes hard to walk away. You want to know the size of it. You want edges. So I stayed. And because I stayed, I began noticing the pattern. The lights didn't appear every night, only in bad weather, or after it. Mist, drizzle, the kind of low cloud that makes your headlights stop in front of you like a wall. They always showed below the road first, never above. If I was on the upper section after midnight and pulled over with the engine off, eventually I would hear one of 3 things. Footsteps matching pace in the trees. Someone moving downhill away from me while sounding much too close, or a voice asking for directions in that same tired, courteous tone. Always simple questions. Does this road go through? How much farther to the parking lot? Are we close to the ranger station? Can you see my hand? That last one came on the 4th night I worked alone, and I nearly drove into the ditch. I had stopped at the rain gauge because the access lock had jammed, and while I was leaning over it with a flashlight between my teeth, a voice rose from the black just below the shoulder of the road. "Can you see my hand?" Not frightened, not threatening, hopeful. I made myself stand slowly and keep the flashlight pointed at the gauge instead of turning toward the voice. My skin felt hot and cold at the same time. Then it asked again, slightly farther away, "Can you see my hand?" Then, from even farther down the slope, another voice, male this time, "Can you see mine?" 3 days later, Earl finally told me what had happened up there 11 years earlier. Not because he wanted to, because a deputy from Blount County came by the lower gate asking whether we'd seen a woman in a red rain shell who had gone missing off Newfound Gap Road. Early 30s. Solo hiker. Last photo from her phone taken at dusk under low cloud. Earl spoke to the deputy outside while I stood in the cabin doorway pretending not to listen. After the deputy left, Earl sat down heavily and rubbed at his jaw for a long time. "She won't be on the trails," he said. "You don't know that." "Yes," he said, "I do." He told me there had been a maintenance man before me named Curtis Bell. Younger than Earl, older than me. Divorced, reliable, one of those competent, quiet men the park ends up leaning on because they never make trouble. Curtis had worked the ridge for 6 years, long enough to know every bend and culvert by memory, long enough to stop joking about the road. One October night, in cold rain, he found a teenage boy standing on the gravel above the crossover. Actually, on the gravel. That mattered. It broke the shape of what everyone thought they knew. The boy was soaked through, barefoot, shivering, and when Curtis got out to help him, he noticed 2 things almost at once. First, the boy never looked at the truck, only past it, into the dark beyond the beams. Second, his right hand remained tucked behind his back the entire time. Curtis asked if he was hurt. The boy asked if Curtis had room in the truck. Curtis asked again where the boy's parents were. The boy said, "Please, don't make me go back into the trees." That line, Earl said, was what did it. Not because it was frightening, but because it sounded exactly like the right thing for a lost kid to say, human enough to collapse caution. Curtis made room. He found the truck 3 days later at an overlook 2 miles down, engine dead, driver's door open, radio still on, no Curtis. No footprints except a mess of smudges in the mud around the passenger side that looked less like tracks than a lot of people turning in circles. They never found him. "You kept working up there after that?" I asked. Earl looked at me with something close to contempt. "You think the road shuts itself down? Storms wait? Equipment stops failing because men get scared?" It was a cruel answer, but not an untrue one. Places keep using people until they run out of people. "After Curtis," he said, "nobody rides alone at night if it can be helped. And nobody gives room in the cab. Ever." The phrase stuck with me. Give room. Not let in. Not pick up. As if whatever waited below the road couldn't simply enter but required an adjustment. A human accommodation. A shift in available space. I started keeping my backpack on the passenger seat. Started piling tools there when I drove. Started hating every curve that forced me to look toward the empty seat beside me. By early November, the normal world had narrowed to a few small certainties. Daylight, coffee, my apartment, gas stations with too much fluorescent light, the grocery store in town where people argued over soup brands as if mountains and darkness and old roads did not exist. Everything else had begun feeling provisional. Then I broke the second rule, not by answering a question, by trying to prove something to myself. It was raining again. A long, cold drizzle that made the road shine black between strips of pale gravel. Near 1:30, I saw a single light below the road. Stationary. Not moving this time. Just waiting between two trunks. I should have driven on. Instead, I stopped 20 yards ahead and cut the engine, thinking that if I watched long enough from a safe distance, maybe I'd finally see an ordinary explanation step out of the dark and laugh at me. A hiker. A trespasser. Kids. The light stayed still. After maybe a minute, a voice came from below and behind me. "Sir?" I didn't answer. "Sir, can you help me?" The voice was a young man's now, scared, breathless, too close. I stared at the windshield. Rain stitched down the glass. Then, because stupidity often wears the face of reason, I reached slowly for the spotlight mounted by the driver's door. I told myself I wasn't answering. I wasn't speaking. I was just looking. I swept the beam across the road and down through the trees. For a moment I caught nothing but branches and wet leaves. Then the light landed on a face. So close I should have seen it without the beam. A man crouched just below the shoulder of the road, one hand gripping a sapling, the other hidden behind him. Rain gleamed on his cheeks. His expression was desperate, in the exact correct proportions: fear, embarrassment, relief. "Please," he said, squinting into the light. "I think I broke my ankle. I should tell you I nearly got out." I opened the door 6 inches before something in me finally protested. Not a brave instinct, not heroism, just a small, ugly detail my mind had withheld until that second. He was crouched on the slope at an angle no injured person would choose. Balanced comfortably, as if he had been posed there. And the hand gripping the sapling was wrong. 5 fingers, yes, but too long from knuckle to tip, pale and jointed like roots. He saw me noticing. His face changed first. Not into a monster's face, not with some theatrical distortion. It simply emptied. The fear stayed arranged on the features, but there was no one behind it. Like a mannequin, posed into panic. Then the hidden hand came out from behind his back. Not one hand. 2. Both tucked together, as if he had been saving them. I slammed the door and started the truck. The voice that came from the ditch as I pulled away had lost all human strain. It sounded patient. "You looked before I was ready." After that, the road changed. Not physically, not in ways I could report on a form, but the pattern accelerated. The questions stopped sounding lost and started sounding familiar. One night, a voice from the trees asked, "How's Earl feeling?" Another asked, in my own mother's exact, tired tone, "You still keeping that seat full?" I nearly wrecked at that one. Then the radio began doing things Earl had warned me about only after they happened. Static, thickening into shape. My own last transmission replayed back to me several minutes later, except softer, as though spoken by someone leaning over my shoulder, trying not to wake another person in the room. One night, driving alone through fog, I heard myself say from the radio speaker, "You there?" Then, after a pause, my own voice again. "Yes. There are kinds of fear that spike and vanish. This wasn't one. It spread. It moved into ordinary minutes and nested there. I started checking the passenger seat before unlocking my truck in daylight. Started waking at 3 a.m., convinced I had heard wet steps circling the outside of my apartment building. Started leaving lamps on in rooms I wasn't using just to create open, occupied-looking space. The major shift came in December. The missing hiker, the woman in the red rain shell, appeared on a trail camera. Not alive, exactly. Not dead, either. The image showed a figure at the very edge of the frame, on a maintenance path, 3 miles from where she had last been seen. Head turned toward the camera. Red shell dark with rain, hands not visible. The timestamp was wrong by 6 years. Earl showed me the printout in the cabin with all the blinds drawn. This one was from an old unit we pulled out of storage, he said. Battery had been dead for years. Nobody knows why it fired. I stared at the grainy figure. The image quality was bad enough to create doubts, and not bad enough to dismiss them. She looks like she's waiting, I said. Earl didn't answer. That was when I started asking different questions. Not, what are they? What do they want? Earl resisted for 2 more nights. Then the weather trapped us both at the upper cabin during freezing rain, road too slick to run the lower section safely, and something about being pinned there with the stove ticking and ice tapping the window finally wore him down. They want passage, he said. Passage to where? Road first, then whatever you make room into. That doesn't mean anything. It means they don't cross the same way we do. He sat at the small table, fingers wrapped around a mug gone cold. The old road was narrower before they widened it, before the gravel shoulders. Men used to talk about hearing people walking in the laurel below them at night, asking to be shown the way through. Back then it was all one rule: don't step off the road to help what won't come into the light. Over time that changed. Now they don't want the road itself. They want what the road teaches. I didn't understand. Maybe he saw that. Roads hold shape through dark country, he said. They connect one place to another. So do rooms, vehicles, hallways, any space made to carry a person forward. I looked at the bunk room door, then back at him. You think they follow people home? I think once one of them learns your pace, it keeps looking for the next path you'll open. That should have sounded insane. Instead, it explained too much. The footsteps beside the truck, the interest in the seat, the replayed voice, the sense not a sight, never a sight, which somehow made it worse that something was using the shape of movement itself to get closer. The cabin groaned in the wind. Ice ticked harder against the window. What happens if one gets in? I asked. Earl's eyes shifted to the hall behind me. I don't know anyone who came back enough to tell it. Sometime after 2 in the morning, while freezing rain silvered the porch rail outside, we heard walking on the gravel. Not from below the road. On it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, unhurried, passing the cabin once, then returning. Not boots exactly, but something approximating boots with attention to the wrong details. Too even, too careful about the sound. Earl put one finger to his lips. The steps stopped just outside the wall by the bunks. Then my own voice, right on the other side of the boards, said, "Earl." Every hair on my arms lifted. It said my name next, in Earl's voice. Then it tapped twice on the window. We did not answer. We did not move. We sat in the yellow stove light while something wearing our voices stood inches from the glass. After a long minute, it walked away. The steps crossed the gravel, reached the road, and then impossibly continued without descending, as if the dark beyond the cabin had accepted them at the same level and made room. When dawn came, Earl opened the door with a flare gun in one hand. There were no tracks on the porch, none on the road, none in the glaze of ice around the cabin. Only a clean handprint on the outside of the bunkroom window. 5 long, pale streaks. That was the first night I understood. The rules were not about avoiding random encounters. They were a negotiation, not with a thing, singular, with a process, a method. Meaningful rules have meaningful consequences. That's true whether you know the system behind them or not. Stay on gravel because gravel is held shape. Leave it, and you enter theirs. Do not answer a voice you cannot fully see, because a voice is a request for alignment. Response gives direction. Do not let the radio finish repeating you, because once your own voice completes the exchange, it has crossed something. I wish I could tell you I quit after that. Instead, I made a plan. Not a good one. The kind men make when they've been frightened too long and start confusing action with control. I decided I would go up the ridge one last time with floodlights, flares, extra batteries, and a camera. I told myself I wasn't hunting anything. I just wanted proof enough to force the park, the county, somebody official, to close that road at night permanently. Not because I trusted institutions to save me, because I wanted the ordinary world to acknowledge there was a seam in it. Earl called it suicide. Then, seeing I was going anyway, he made me promise two things. If I heard my voice before I spoke, I'd leave immediately. And under no circumstances would I create open space beside myself once the lights appeared. Meaning what? No empty seat, no open door, no standing in a doorway, no stepping aside on a narrow path. They don't need belief, they need room. I went anyway. The night I chose was clear and cold. That should have made it safer. It didn't. It made everything easier to see, which only sharpened the places sight stopped. I loaded the truck so full the cab felt cramped. Toolboxes in the passenger footwell, backpack on the seat, cooler wedged against it, flare gun in the console, camera on the dash. For an hour nothing happened. The station checks went smoothly. The road stayed empty. My own fear began to feel performative, excessive. I hated that feeling almost as much as the fear itself. Then, near the crossover, on my way down, the radio clicked on by itself. Not static. A single, clean click, followed by a question in my own voice. Can you see my hand? My mouth went dry. The truck was still moving. I kept it moving. Then lights appeared ahead of me. Not below the road this time, on it. 3 pale lights in a line around the bend, as if hikers were walking uphill toward my truck. I braked instinctively. That instinct nearly killed me. The lights did not bob or sway like lights on heads. They glided. When I stopped, they stopped. I grabbed the spotlight and hit them. There were no people there. Only 3 reflective markers nailed to saplings at the edge of the road. Markers that had never been there before. Behind them, in the dark between the trees, something knocked once on my passenger side window. I turned so fast I felt my neck pull. There was no face, only a hand resting gently against the glass from outside. Long-fingered, pale, human enough to be worse. Before I could react, the radio spoke again in Earl's voice. Make room. I almost believed it. God help me. For half a second I almost believed Earl had somehow gotten up there and was warning me about something behind me, telling me to move, to lean away, to shift in the seat. That half second was enough. My body did what voices train bodies to do. I drew my shoulder inward, made room. The hand vanished from the glass, and something settled into the passenger seat hard enough to depress the suspension on that side of the truck. No body appeared, nothing visible, just weight, real weight. The truck tilted slightly. Seat springs creaked under an unseen shape. Every part of me went cold. Then the smell hit me. Not rot, not mud, wet stone, cold laurel leaves, air from a tunnel or culvert where sunlight never reaches. The seat belt on the passenger side slowly drew tight. I did not scream. I say that not proudly, but because terror can become so complete, it goes silent. I put the truck in reverse and floored it. Gravel spat. The unseen weight beside me shifted, but did not disappear. The smell strengthened. Something touched the cooler lid with careful exploring taps. Then, from inches above the seat, My own voice said softly, "You looked before I was ready." I fired the flare gun without aiming. The flare blasted across the cab and out the partly open driver's window in a shower of sparks so hot I felt one burn my cheek. The truck filled with red light and smoke. For one impossible instant, the passenger seat was occupied. Not by a person, by overlapping attempts. A rain shell, a boy's narrow knee, Earl's work jacket, a white hand with too many joints, the dim oval of my own face reflected where no reflection should be. Then the flare struck the ditch and exploded in the brush. The weight vanished. I rammed the truck into drive and shot downhill through smoke, half blind, one hand wiping tears from the burned side of my face. Branches whipped the mirrors. The radio screamed with layered voices, mine, Earl's, the woman asking for the road, someone laughing softly with no humor in it at all. At the lower gate, the chain was closed. It should have been open. I had left it open. In the beam of my headlights, I saw why. Someone stood beside the gate, one hand on the post. Red rain shell, hood down, woman's face pale and turned toward me. The missing hiker. Even at 40 yards, I knew what was wrong. The posture, too still through the spine, head tilted a fraction too far, one arm behind her back. I swerved off the road toward the maintenance cut and nearly rolled the truck doing it. Tires gouged mud. The undercarriage slammed rock. I felt the rear end fishtail, catch, then leap forward through brush until the old service spur rejoined the main access road below the gate. I didn't stop at the cabin, didn't stop for Earl, didn't stop until I hit the highway with the windows down and winter air tearing through the cab. When I did stop, at a gas station 20 miles away, the passenger seat was empty. But the cooler had been opened. Inside, on top of the ice packs and bottled water, lay a handful of wet gravel. I never worked another night on that ridge. Earl retired by spring. Officially, unofficially, I think he understood retirement and retreat are not the same thing. You can leave a road without closing what followed you down from it. For a while, I believed distance mattered. I moved out of Maryville, took a maintenance job at a school district outside Knoxville, day shift only, hallways, boilers, roof drains, simple problems, human problems. I told nobody the full story, because once you hear it in your own voice as narrative, it starts sounding arranged, and I was terrified of arrangement. Months passed. Then small things began. A wet footprint on the rubber floor mat of my truck when it hadn't rained. The passenger seatbelt drawn half an inch farther out than where I left it. The school radio on my cart crackling and saying, once, very faintly, "Can you see my hand?" I sold the truck. I changed apartments again, this time choosing a place with no long hallway from the front door to the bedroom. That choice felt crazy while I made it, and necessary once I'd signed the lease. Because by then I understood the deeper truth, the one I had missed while I was still thinking like a worker dealing with a dangerous road. The road was never the whole thing. The road was a lesson. A narrow human-made passage through dark country teaches a certain invitation. Forward movement, ordered space, trust in what connects one place to another. If something learns that logic from the edge, learns pace, sequence, and approach, then every other passage built on the same promise starts resembling a door. Roads, rooms, radios, hallways, the empty seat beside you. That is why the rules kept changing. Not because people were inventing folklore to dress up fear, because the method kept improving. I have not seen lights in the trees since I left the Smokies. Not like before. What I get now is subtler. Sometimes, walking through a parking garage late, I hear footsteps keeping pace one row over, exactly matched, never hurrying to catch up. Sometimes my phone speaker glitches during a call and repeats my own last word back to me in a quieter voice. Once, in a hotel corridor in Asheville. I came around a corner and saw a woman in a red shell standing at the far end, facing my door, as if uncertain which room was hers. I froze. She lifted one hand to wave. I didn't wait to see the other. The reason I'm telling this now is because last week something happened. I can't file under stress or memory or any of the tidy names people use to keep reality manageable. I was driving home after dark from a basketball game at the middle school. Nothing dramatic, just wet roads and winter fields. My nephew had left his backpack in the back seat, and at a red light I leaned over to grab it. For less than a second, I took my weight off the driver's side and shifted toward the middle. Made room. The seat beside me dipped immediately. Not later, not maybe, immediately. My whole body locked. I did not turn my head. I did not breathe. I sat at the light, staring forward while cold air that smelled faintly of wet stone and mountain laurel, touched the side of my face. Then the radio came on. I don't mean my phone connecting. I mean the old handheld park radio I keep wrapped in a towel in my hall closet, battery removed, because throwing it away felt too much like forwarding mail. It came on from the back seat, clear as a man speaking from the next room. And in Earl's voice, tired and very far away, it said, "Don't open the door until it asks." The light turned green. I drove. I drove 20 miles without looking right once. Nothing asked. When I finally stopped in a lit grocery store lot full of carts and families and the bright, ordinary misery of people loading bulk paper towels into SUVs, the seat was empty. The backpack was on the floor, and on the passenger side window, fogged from the inside, was the outline of a handprint slowly fading. 5 long marks. I don't know whether Earl is still alive. I haven't called him in a year, maybe more. Part of me is afraid he'll answer. Part of me is more afraid that someone else will, in his voice, and ask me if there's room to talk. I don't drive mountain roads after midnight anymore. I don't leave the seat beside me clear. I don't answer voices from stairwells, hallways, parking decks, dark yards, or radios that should be off. And if I hear footsteps keeping pace where there shouldn't be any path at all, I change mine immediately. Maybe that's all this ever was, a set of survival habits grown around one bad stretch of mountain and whatever used it first. But I don't think so. I think the Smokies were only where it became easy to notice, because deep, dark country teaches you to respect passage. It teaches you what it means to be guided, what it means to trust a shaped space more than the wilderness pressing in around it. And I think something out there learned the same lesson from us. If you work nights in the mountains and someone tells you there is one rule for a reason, don't relax when they only give you one. It means they're still trying to keep the system simple enough to survive. By the time there are 4 rules, it's already closer. By the time you understand what the rules are really protecting, it has probably learned your pace. And if one night, on some dark road or apartment corridor or empty hospital wing, a voice from just out of sight asks whether you can see its hand, don't look for it. Don't ask who's there. Don't make room because you feel rude or afraid or curious. Keep moving, because if it is asking, it is still on the edge. If it stops asking, it may already be beside you.